Well, welcome to 1136 Ministries. I'm Lou Sloger, and as always, thanks for being here and appreciate your prayers and support. Today, we're going to spend a little time in Colossians 3, verses 22 through verse 1 of chapter 4. It's an interesting passage. It could stir a lot of debate. We're going to avoid the all that kind of stuff, but I do think it'll be helpful for us. So let me just jump right in, read these verses, and then see what God has for us today. Thanks again for being here. Colossians 3, beginning at verse 22. Slaves, in all things obey those who are your masters on earth, not with external service, as those who merely please men, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. For he who does wrong will receive the consequence of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven. So one of the first things that we're going to address just briefly is the Bible is not condoning slavery, right? There's two things we need to appreciate. Number one, the slavery of the scripture that's talked about in the Bible, like in this passage, is radically different from the slavery that existed in our country and that we fought a civil war over. The Bible clearly condemns kidnapping and other crimes surrounding that. But slavery was just a part of life in those days, and it'd been around for a long time, which those people who accuse America for starting slavery or perfecting slavery just once again don't know anything about history. Slavery has been around almost as long as human beings have been around, and it's a sad commentary. However, Paul is just addressing the reality that people lived in. Over the course of time, I firmly believe the implications of the gospel and the preaching and embracing of the gospel, little by little, eroded a whole mindset of how people can be property or held captive. And little by little, it's gone away for the most part. In different parts of the world, it still exists. And I would venture to say that the places where it still exists are places where the gospel has had little to no effect. The gospel is a very freeing message, and it's a very challenging message of how we treat one another and how we serve the Lord and how we don't worry about what people are saying or thinking and doing. It's primarily what we're doing with our own faith and our own relationship with Christ. So he's addressing the reality that is, in that day and age, there were slaves. There were slaves who became Christians. They embraced the gospel. And Paul talks about it in a few other different places. But primarily what he's saying is this, and it's true for all of us, and it's easy to say when you're not a slave. But what he's basically saying is your outward set of circumstances are not the primary reality of your life. The thing that you should really be thinking about is who and what you are in Christ and how that should permeate your heart and mind and dictate how you treat others, how you serve others, even though your own situation might be less than appealing or what you would hope for yourself or others. I think of Joseph being in the pit by his brothers throwing him in there, ends up in the dungeon once he gets to Egypt. You can go throughout Scripture. Jonah ends up in the belly of a great fish. There's all kinds of situations where people find themselves when they say, wow, if I could choose, I would have this different. And if you can free yourself, if you can change your circumstances in a lawful way, by all means, do it. However, if you're in that situation, whatever it is in the way of, I'm not real crazy about this, you can make your own life a prison, or you can be a free man regardless of the circumstances that you're in. And it has to do with this. It has to do with don't interact with people simply to make them happy or to put on a front. but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. It's really one of the keys to life is my sincerity before God in seeking to fear his name. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's the beginning of knowledge. It's the beginning of understanding. The fear of the Lord needs to be a way of life. I recognize who he is, and the situation that I am in is under the umbrella of his sovereignty. So sometimes when we resist an outward set of circumstances, we're really resisting and complaining and challenging God's right to be God in our lives. And again, I recognize this is easier said than done. All of us, I think, can say we have been in situations, we have been through things that we would never have chosen left to ourselves, that were painful, sad things. You lost a job, or a spouse divorced you, or your kids rebelled. There's situations where we would say, I don't want it to be this way, but it is that way. And then we can make things worse by resisting and challenging God's right, or we can humble ourselves and find grace that is sufficient for whatever God brings our way. No temptation has undertaken you, but such is common to man. And God is faithful. God is faithful. And with that temptation, with that trial, with that circumstances, he will provide you the grace you need to be able to endure it and escape it and overcome it from the heart. Once again, you can be outwardly in bondage, but inwardly you can still be a free man. And I'm saying again, it's easier said than done. But on a moment by moment basis in our lives, we need to recognize we can make a bad situation worse by having a poor attitude, by rejecting God's sovereignty, by being arrogant and prideful, or we can make that situation better, not necessarily change it, but better for us because we're humbling ourselves, we're finding grace that's sufficient, and we're thankful for what God's doing in our lives. So slaves, employees, don't just be an eye pleaser, a man pleaser, but do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men. Before I was a saved man, I was working for the Union Pacific Railroad. And it was kind of comical how we would go through the day basically seeing how little work we could do all day long. There was a day when I was walking to the infirmary. I had some issue I had to get dealt with. And as I'm walking back at a pretty good clip, an old dude is walking toward me, and he's doing what I called the UP shuffle. He was going to take as much time as he could to get from point A to point B. And as he sees me walking, he says, hey, what are you doing? I go, what are you talking about? And he goes, we're getting paid by the hour. Slow down. And I kind of chuckled and realized that was the mindset of almost everybody who worked there. We're getting paid by the hour. Slow down. Well, then I got saved, and I developed a conscience about a passage like this. Hey, you're being paid for 8 hours work. Give them 8 hours of work. You're getting paid to do a job. Do the job. And when I started to actually work, I took so much grief. In fact, one particular night, I got spit on because I was working, and the guys gathered around, start mocking me, giving me grief. And I wasn't fully sanctified. Still, I'm not. So I said some sarcastic things, and guys spit on me, and I had to let that one slide and just kept working. So again, we're in a day and age where a biblical work ethic is hard to find. People complain about not being able to find a job, and I know there's a degree of truth to that as well in our society. But I think it's easier to find a job if you have a good work ethic, if you want to do the job that you're given to do. In fact, I believe in a day like today, you can become really, really successful just by having a good work ethic, because they're hard to find. So whatever you're doing, do it from the heart, do it fearing God, do it for him, not for men, and then recognize that In God's timing, He will reward you properly. Whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. That's true for all of life. Wherever we find ourselves, whatever we are doing, ultimately, we need to recognize God's sovereign hand in these things. And my situation, my job, my circumstances, whatever it is, God's in the midst of that. He's a very present help. He's fully aware of everything that's going on. And so our response is always ultimately to God. How we treat somebody else, how we respond, how we argue, how we fight. At the same time, all that stuff makes its way to his throne. This is why David could say this. This is kind of an amazing thing to consider. David committed adultery with Bathsheba, and then he conspired to murder Uriah. And then when he's finally convicted through Nathan of his sin, in Psalm 51, as he's confessing, he says this: against thee and thee only I have sinned and done what is evil in thy sight. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. You committed adultery. You conspired to commit murder. You tried to, put it off as long as possible. How could you say against God only have you sinned? Because ultimately, that was the truth. As we sin against other people with our bad attitudes or whatever, however you want to do it, ultimately we didn't recognize, you trace that upstream, and the final resting place of our sin is against God, which makes sin such a bad thing. I mean, how we treat each other is important, but we need to recognize the real issue is, how am I ultimately responding to God's sovereignty in my life, to his directives in my life, to his commands in my life, to his provisions in my life, to his grace in my life, however he has been pleased to manifest that day by day and week by week and month by month. So ultimately, we need to recognize we're serving him, and from him we'll receive the reward of our inheritance. I think of the 10 lepers that were healed, and one came back to say thanks, right? And I think of the service that we render to people, and we need to come to grips with that's a pretty good average. You'll help a lot of people along the way. You'll give, expecting nothing in return. You give your shirt as well as your coat. You turn the other cheek. You go the extra mile. And most people will use you and abuse you. Most people will take what you give them and move on. About 1 out of 10 will be genuinely grateful, where it has a real impact in their life, and they genuinely show some appreciation for what you've done for them. Now, the other side of that coin is this. We don't want to be those who grovel and kiss the ring and all that kind of stuff. However, if someone has been kind to you and someone has been gracious to you, that should mean something to you. It should impact how you think of them, how you reciprocate to them, how you respond to them. And ultimately, once again, you trace that upstream. God has been kind. God has been gracious. God has been forgiving. God has been patient. So how are you responding? Whatever's going on in your life, he's ordained it. He's overseeing it. But be the kind of person that understands genuine gratitude. And when someone has been nice and kind to you, don't forget that. And if they're not perfect, which none of us are, what they have done for you doesn't blind you to their imperfections, but it also doesn't allow you to blow them out of proportion, making them sound like they're the Wicked Witch of the East or something because you didn't get your way at one point in time in life. It's a tragic commentary on us more than it is on them. So we're going to receive the reward of even a cup of water given in his name. That reward might come sooner. It might come later. We need to have the grace and the patience and the faith to recognize ultimately, with a sincere heart and fearing God and a life of faith, we're serving him, and he will reward us in the proper time. Verse 25 says the reverse of that is true as well. For he who does wrong will receive the consequence of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. One of the sad commentaries on human existence is we want to get even. We want our pound of flesh. We want revenge. And it's a hard thing to put off. It's our pride. But what we need to recognize is this: judgment is God's. No one's getting away with anything. Every single one of us is going to reap what we sow. God will reward and God will judge. God will bless, God will punish. We just need to kind of like get out of the way and let God be God. I don't need to take my own revenge. In fact, biblically, I'm told not to. Make room for the vengeance of God. In fact, Hebrews 10 says, it's a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. If we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains any sacrifice for sin, but a fearful, terrifying expectation of judgment and the fury of the fire which will consume the adversary. The person who's under that reality is not to be envied, they're to be pitied. So when we're not getting our fair treatment, it's okay. Entrust the situation to God. He will set the record straight. The day will come when everything will be called by its proper name, and no longer will men call good evil and evil good. Trust the Lord to do what he can do and what he has promised that he will do in due time. We'll receive the reward of our inheritance, or we'll be rightly punished by God for our wrongdoing. And then he finishes with how those in charge should treat those who are under their authority. Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven. It always comes back to that, right? How do I exercise my authority? Well, in large part, it's a recognizing whose authority am I under. All authority has been delegated authority. The only ultimate authority, once again, is God's. So if I'm in charge of some people, if I'm overseeing some people, I need to do that recognizing I need to give an account of how I'm exercising my authority. And the best way to exercise my authority is to follow the example of how God exercises his, whether that's as a parent, a boss, or a pastor, or whatever authority I have in life. It's delegated authority. I'll give an account for how it's exercised. And the best way to do that, to exercise it properly, is to follow the example of how God exercised his authority. Now, again, all these things, the sincerity of heart, fearing God, a proper attitude, serving the Lord and not man, how we treat one another, whether we're in the position of authority or whether we're under that authority, it all comes back down to the matters of our own heart. Fearing God, trusting him, and believing everything that he has said and done and promised. In Psalm 139, it says this: establish thy word to thy servant, is that which produces a fear or a reverence for thee. And so I really believe that as we read our Bible, we should read it in such a way where we begin to view all of existence, all of creation, all of our own reality through the lenses of there's a God in heaven to whom I'll give an account, and fearing his holy name is one of the most important things I'll ever do. I trust and I obey. I cultivate holiness in the fear of God. I humbly bow before his throne, gladly knowing that he's going to cause all things to work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So again, no matter what position you're in, do it as unto the Lord. Whether you eat or drink, do everything to the glory of God. Obeying authority, exercising authority, work ethic, all those things flow from your heart with a proper view and respect for who God is and what he has done and what he is doing in our lives. All right? So there's our lesson for today. As always, thanks for being here. I want to encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, 1136 Men on YouTube. We're at Facebook and we're on X. Love you to drop me a note, see how things are going. In fact, I got one today. Very thankful for that. 1136ministries@gmail.com. Got some things in the works, pretty excited. I'm just really, really thankful. And everything that I said today, in measure, I have lived the last year. Things have not gone the way I wanted to. And I could fight and scream and holler, or I could yield and say, okay, God, you're in charge. So I'm trying, and just pray for one another. Pray for me. I'm really trying to not just teach the Bible. I'm trying to believe it and live it. And I want to be pleasing to God and useful and fruitful in knowledge of Christ. So God bless you all. Have a great day, and Lord willing, we'll be back here in a couple of days.